Hi everyone, welcome to Friday Live with Ashani from Serious Migration. This series was specially dedicated for skilled migration to Australia, and over how many weeks? About 7 weeks we went through different aspects of skilled migration from the beginning, trying to help you understand what the visas are available and how do you become eligible to apply for one of the skilled migration visas. And then we went through each different state and explained to you how the states work and what is the eligibility criteria for each different state. Today is kind of our last or the second last week of this skilled migration series. Today I'm talking about Australian Capital Territory. But next week I'll talk a little bit about NT, but also next week very excited, we are starting a new mini series which is to do with employer nominated visa to Australia. That is the biggest hot topic these days. Australian employers looking to sponsor employees from different countries for many occupations where they're struggling to find local labor. So I'm going to do this series from next week to talk about all the aspects of employer nominated visa, subclass 482, subclass 186, subclass 494. Alright, so what's today? Today is about Canberra, or Australian Capital Territory. Again, a very interesting migration program, large migration program, and many occupations are available. They are also open to onshore and offshore applicants. The two visa subclasses available are subclass 190 and subclass 491, but there are different eligibility criteria and different pathways depending on your where you live and what you've been doing, because there is a special pathway for PhD graduates as well. Right, what special things I can tell you about ACT? They are quite adamant about the commitment to living in ACT from what we understand. So they want to make sure that if ACT gives you an invitation, that they want to make sure that you actually are committed to living in Australian Capital Territory. So they have put in place few rules or policies to make sure that they only select the genuine applicants. Once I go through these criteria, you will also understand that that is kind of their expectation. So what I can tell you is, if you're interested in coming to ACT, please do your research and make sure you understand the weather, what it's like, the location, and how far it is from your country if you're considering flying times, and make a real commitment to living in the state forever, or at least for the first few years before you move onto a different state. Right. So as for any skilled migration, the two visas are available are subclass 190, which is permanent residency. If you can get that granted, you come to Australia or you become an Australian permanent resident. Less conditions, pretty much no conditions attached to the visa. The expectation is for you to live in that state for at least 2 years. And all your dependents and spouse also can get the same visa. Subclass 491, it's a provisional visa granted for 5 years. The commitment is for you to live and work, you and your dependents, very important, for you to live and work and study in that in any regional area of the state. So if we are looking at ACT, you must be working and living and studying in ACT for at least 3 years. And then you are eligible to apply for permanent residency under subclass 191. Right. So let me first go through the subclass 190 Canberra residents eligibility criteria. You have to first make sure that you fulfill the general requirements in the Home Affairs points table. And then when you're ready to lodge, the process is for you to first apply through Canberra Matrix. And when they know that you are eligible, they will send you an invitation with an online link to go ahead and lodge your nomination. And the fee to do this is $300. So what the first criteria I'm going to go through is subclass 190 Canberra residence pathway, which means you and your dependents must either be living in Canberra, you have to live in Canberra, but your dependents either has to live in Canberra or overseas. They can't be living in other states. So they are quite strict on this rule. There are 3 subcategories for you to be eligible. So your occupation has to be on the ACT critical list, or if you're currently in Canberra or in anywhere in ACT as a 457 or 482 holder, the main applicant, then your occupation doesn't have to be on the Canberra ACT critical list. It can be in that occupation list based on which you got your 457 or 482. I hope you understand this. Or the other pathway is if you're a business owner in Canberra or in ACT. So you have to be a majority shareholder of a business that's operating in Canberra, and you can apply under the Canberra small business owner category. So residence in Canberra. So as I said, for 190 you need to be living in Canberra. The duration is, for subclass 190 you have to be living in Canberra for 6 months. Again, you have to make sure they will look at your bank statements, transaction histories and everything to make sure that you fulfill this residency requirement. And employment in Canberra. So you have to be working in Canberra for at least 26 weeks. This can be for more than one employee. This can be self-employed, or you can be a business owner. And or this can be combined. So you worked for one employer, then you worked for another employer, then you ran a business. Still you can combine all 3 to fulfill this employment requirement. When you're an employee, that means you work for a third party. You must have at least worked for 30 hours a week for this at least 26 weeks out of the last 30 weeks before you can lodge your expression of interest in Canberra Matrix. And you need to prove your pay slips and bank statements to show this employment. And also you need to show that this is a genuine position, and any unpaid or traineeships or scholarships, volunteer positions are not eligible for this employment category. And you need to get your employer to give a statutory declaration explaining that this is a genuine position according to Australian legislation. And if you're self-employed, you have to make sure your taxable income is at least $1,000 per week in the last 26 weeks out of the 30 weeks just before you lodge your application in Canberra Matrix. And if you're a business, you must at least have ACT business activity on your ABN for at least 12 months. And again, you have to sign a stat deck confirming your ABN, location of the business, start dates, activity, duties, annual income, and if you employ any employees, you have to give the details of the employees as well. So this is the requirement for a small business. So the English requirements. If you're expecting a 190 in Canberra under the residence requirement, you need to have proficient or superior English. That is quite high English. If I take IELTS, it's either 7 or 8, unless your occupation is a chef or your occupation is a level 3 or 4 occupation. Level 3 occupations are normally trade occupations like carpenters, fitters, welders. So unless your occupation is a trade occupation or a chef, you need to prove that you are proficient or superior English. And again, as I mentioned earlier as well, they are quite strict on their commitment to living in Canberra. So you need to sign a declaration commitment to living in Canberra during your visa process and at least 2 years from the visa grant. And again, if you have a spouse or partner, they must be a resident of Canberra or they have to be living offshore. They can't be living in another state. And then you need to prove documents of relationship if you're claiming points for your partner. Again, the service fee is $300 if you want to go through this category. So this requirement that I explained is for subclass 190 residents, which means you're living in Canberra, the main applicant. Now I will go through the requirement for subclass 190 for overseas applicant. Most of the requirements are similar, but there is obviously no small business owner pathway for people who are offshore. Again, you have to meet the Department of Home Affairs criteria. So this is for an applicant who's currently living in offshore, who's never been to Australia in the last 12 months, or doesn't have any dependents or spouse living in Australia. So you can't apply under this stream if you have spouse or dependents living in Australia. Again, you have to meet the Department of Home Affairs criteria, the basic criteria, age, English, qualification, all that criteria. And then you have to have a nominated occupation in the latest ACT critical skills list. You need to have at least 3 years full-time postgraduate work experience. So if I compare that with the Canberra resident stream, if you're going through the Canberra resident stream, the employment is at 26 weeks. But this is the overseas stream, then you need to have at least 3 years full-time work experience. And also you need to prove that your employability in Canberra. So this stream, you need to do some research, find out what kind of occupations or jobs available for your occupation, and do a submission to prove that if you come to Canberra or ACT with subclass 190, you are employable. It'll be easy for you to find a job, and your skills are needed in ACT economy. Say English is similar. You need to have proficient or superior English unless your occupation is chef or skill level 3. So same requirement. Commitment to Canberra, again strict requirement. You have, as I said, you need to know what you're getting into, and you need to be ready to live in ACT. That's why they need to make sure that you don't have any dependents or any family living anywhere else in Australia who's going to be included in this application, because this could be motivation for you to move to a different state. And also for this residency requirement, you have to make sure that you have not lived in Australia in the last 12 months. So if you just moved out of Australia, then you are not eligible to apply for ACT offshore stream. And also you need to make sure that you have settlement funds. You have enough funds to come to Australia and settle. And again, if you need to claim points for your partner or spouse in the Canberra matrix, you need to prove the relationship by marriage certificates and civil partnership. They do not accept de facto relationship without a relationship register. And again, this process will cost you $300. So that is the subclass 190 or the permanent residency in ACT for an overseas applicant. Let's quickly go through subclass 491, overseas and onshore applicant. So subclass 491 again is the provisional visa granted for 5 years, and you will get permanent residency after 3 years. You can get, it's not like you will get, you can get it if you fulfill the requirement and lodge another visa application under subclass 191. Right. Again, you have to meet the Home Affairs criteria, the age, the basic criteria that we've already gone through. Just to mention, if you haven't seen this series, you can go and watch it on YouTube. So if you watch it from the first week, you will understand everything you need to actually lodge an application for skill migration from onshore, from offshore. I've tried my best to explain very simply about the visa subclasses available and the criteria and what you need to meet, how do you lodge an EOI. So I think it's all in there for you to go and have a look. And again, this is for subclass 491, overseas applicant. You have to have your occupation in the ACT critical list, and you need to have at least 1 year full-time work experience. So subclass 190, you need 3 years, 491, you only need 1 year. And it has to be relevant to ACT economy, and then you have to prove your employability just like for subclass 190. And you need to have competent English. So 190, they are asking for higher English than 491. 491, if you take IELTS, they only need 6 in each band. And again, you need to do research and make sure you are committing into living in ACT for at least 2 years from your arrival. And same residency requirement if you can't have lived in Australia in the last 12 months, and you cannot have dependents living or a spouse living anywhere else in Australia to be eligible for subclass 491 as a offshore candidate. Again, $300 to go through this process. I will now quickly go through the 491 requirement for Canberra residents. So if you're currently living in Canberra, you will be eligible for this. Again, you need to have your occupation on the ACT critical list, but if you're on a 457 or 482, and you must have worked for your employer for at least 3 months. So if you just arrived here on a 482 and next month you're thinking of doing Canberra matrix, you cannot do that. You have to work for at least 3 months. But if you're on a 482, 457, your occupation does not have to be on Canberra critical list. That is a huge plus point for a lot of our applicants, because anyone who's here on 482, 457 is eligible to apply for this 491 category. Not many other states gives this direct pathway. I think this is a great pathway to encourage people to stay on and get permanent residency. And again, this is available for small business owners. Then you have to make sure that you have majority ownership of a small business that's running in ACT. Again, if you're doing that, your occupation does not have to be on the ACT critical list, because you're not applying under working in critical sector. So residents in Canberra, you need to live in Canberra for at least 3 months. For subclass 190, it's 6 months. For 491, it's only 3 months. And again, they will check and make sure that you actually lived there by checking your bank statements and other things that they can easily figure out whether you actually lived for that time. So please keep that in mind as well. And employment, so last one, they expected you to work for 26 weeks for 190. For 491, it's only 13 weeks. And again, you can have worked for more than one employer, or you can be self-employed or running a business. This is very flexible. I think a really good option for a lot of our applicants. If they can't find work straight away, then they could be self-employed. And if you're an employee, you must have at least worked for 15 hours a week. So that is part-time. That is considered part-time work. And it has to be a genuine position, and the employer has to declare that it is a genuine position. And if you're self-employed, then your taxable income is $520 per week. For 190, it's $1,000, but this is less for 491 for at least 13 weeks out of the 15 weeks just before you lodge Canberra matrix. And again, you need to have run the business for 12 months and have a business activity on your ABN. And again, you have to sign a stat deck explaining your business, the location, the employees, the turnover, and everything, so they can understand the dynamics of your business. Again, you need competent English. The English requirement is obviously lower for 491 than 190, but again, you have to be committed to living in Canberra. That is a big requirement. And if you have spouse, partner, and you're planning of claiming points, then you have to make sure that you do have evidence of relationship for you to claim points. So I think that's it for Canberra subclass 190 and 491. I quickly ran through all the requirements. If you're still not sure, getting in touch, Canberra or ACT is again a great state. I think it's quite easy to get the nomination if you are the right candidate and if you're willing to work and live there. But if you're not sure how to go through the Canberra matrix, because it can be a bit tricky, how the matrix works is by point base. They look at the highest points to the employability to English and take into consideration all the aspects of how you claimed points, and you have to make sure the amount of points that you claimed when you apply for the matrix is the same points that when you apply for the nomination and the visa. Otherwise, your visa application will get refused. Again, that's a big point that we always tell our clients. Make sure when you lodge your ROI or the Canberra matrix, you have to make sure that you claim the right amount of points, because if not, it will come back and it will be a problem for you when you actually lodge your visa application. So I hope that is clear for you. Do we have any questions, Mario? Yeah, so there are no questions so far. So thank you so much for listening in, and that's about it for ACT. Again, if you're not sure about how to lodge your EOI, get in touch with us. We are registered migration agents who are willing to assist you. And so the next week we are going to be talking about Northern Territory in the first half of our live session, but then again we are going to pick up talking about ENS or employee nominated visa. I'll just give you a very generalized brief idea of ENS and what visa subclasses are available. But then in the upcoming weeks, on a Friday, 2 p.m. Brisbane time, I will be breaking down all the aspects of the ENS, or the employer-nominated visa subclass 482, 186, 494, and labor agreements and DAMA, all those visa subclasses for you to understand and see if you're eligible, whether you're an employer in Australia looking to hire overseas people, or to get their visa status tabled for your current employees who are here on temporary visas. I think this would be a really good opportunity for you to learn everything you need to know about how to move on with the process. Thank you so much for listening in, and I will see you next week.